Hi, long time no see! Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you've never been here before. This is where I give my opinions on things and how they've been negatively affected by capitalism and the internet. This week, it's the internet's fault. It's becoming a more and more common piece of discourse lately to police the way people engage with other cultures as cultural appropriation, and I would just like to explore that because the last few times this has happened, I think that assertion was wrong. You may have seen in the last week or so, depending on when I finish editing this, those girls who went viral for being weebs attempting to start their own little idol group, Sailor Moon style, and how the internet bullied them into oblivion.
1, 2, so sweet! Hello, we are sorb3t! We are an idol group based in California, and today we wanted to teach you guys our call and responses!
Sure, it was a little bit cringe, but as I have repeatedly expressed on this channel, and in this series in particular, cringe is debatable, and definitely not something worthy of being lambasted for, unless you're Elon Musk. But that cringe comes from being rich and out of touch, so that's okay. Bullying people for being cringe is only okay if you're punching up, and you may quote me on that. It is always okay to bully billionaires. Anyway, the poor kids were dragged on TikTok where they originally posted the video, and then it blew up so much that it ended up on Twitter where they were summarily cast into the fires of public opinion and hung out to dry. This wasn't just a cringy video, this was a social crime according to the faceless mass of people coming after them, and it wasn't long before they disappeared off the internet because they were being doxxed for, you guessed it, cultural appropriation. Before that, there was huge discourse on TikTok regarding British Chinese food, with Americans accusing the British Chinese food of not being authentic enough and having a go at us for referring to it as having a Chinese, as if there aren't American expressions that are equally weird to the rest of the world, but go off. The thing is, of course British Chinese food is different to American Chinese food. First of all, there are a lot more Chinese people in America, population-wise, who have pushed the cuisine forward in that country over the last 30 to 50 years. Secondly, both countries have their own influences, so while I understand people being baffled at the overuse of curry sauce in Chinese takeout over here, it makes sense to us in the context that Indian food has been a staple of British diets for a long time. No, don't look behind the curtain! Our national dish is chicken tikka masala, for God's sake. I am not making that up, you can Google that. Our Chinese food is not only influenced by British cuisine, but also by Indian cuisine, and has evolved into the Chinese that took TikTok by storm. And the problem I had with this discourse is that none of it is authentic Chinese. American isn't either. You want authentic Chinese food? Go to China. Every culture's food that ends up in other places is going to be influenced by its surroundings. Look at Tex-Mex. It's not authentic Mexican food, but it's not trying to be. It was created by the Hispanic people living there out of the ingredients they had more readily available to them at the time. As is British Chinese, as is American Chinese. American Italian food isn't authentic Italian, but does that make it any less culturally significant to the Italian people who have been living in America and passing it down for generations? No. It just means it's different. It's not cultural appropriation, it's multiculturalism. And that's what I want to talk about today. Multiculturalism is a sociological, philosophical, and political term that can have a variety of meanings within those contexts, but essentially in today's videos we're going to define it as, and this is very boring, a form of cultural pluralism in which various ethnic groups collaborate and enter into a dialogue with one another without having to sacrifice their particular identities. So in order for an area to be multicultural, it has to have integrated numerous social, political, or ethnic identities without allowing any individual identity to stomp out the others or take over. Cities like New York and London, or even individual boroughs like Chinatown or Soho, where cultures exist alongside each other like a collage of countries, and the boundaries between them all are basically non-existent. Cultural appropriation is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, as the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, or ideas of a society by members of another and typically more dominant society. According to the BBC, cultural appropriation is when a tradition, such as clothing or a hairstyle, is taken from a culture and used in a different way. It can offend people when the people do this without making it clear where the traditions come from, or when they don't acknowledge how important they are to certain cultures. This can make some people feel as if their culture is not being respected. So white people with dreads talking in AVE, for example. Or basically everything the Kardashians have ever done. There is a line between appreciating a culture and appropriating it, but as we start to police more and more of people's interactions with cultures other than their own, it becomes harder to see where the line is, and to some people, any act of engaging with another culture becomes appropriation. Growing up in Australia, I was surrounded by a lot of different Asian cultures. Chinese, Taiwanese, Thai, Japanese, Korean, because those are the countries that are closest. In England, you learn French or German or Italian or Spanish at school. In Australia, I took Mandarin for 6 years. You learn the language of the closest countries to you. Obviously, because you're trying to communicate with the people nearest. Now, I had a lot less exposure to African cultures, except for Sudanese people specifically, because there were a lot of them emigrated to my area. So my understanding of black culture, as it pertains to the American idea of black people, is really only through watching TV and engaging in content made by those people. Even moving back to Britain, I suddenly felt as if I was behind on the culture because there are a lot more black population over here as well, from the Caribbean as well as from Africa. And I felt out of my depth because I wasn't raised around it. It's the same way I feel when I'm around rich people. I don't know the etiquette and I'm scared of saying something wrong in case I look stupid, or worse, I offend somebody. Whereas I have a lot less hang-ups around Asian cultures because I spent a lot more of my childhood surrounded by them than I did black culture. I think this is where a lot of the problems surrounding the misuse of cultural appropriation come from, because sometimes when people are trying really hard not to be racist, it can come across as a bit racist. There was a scandal a few years ago online where this white girl decided to wear a Chinese-style dress to her prom, and a huge chunk of the internet exploded at her for it, calling it appropriation, calling her racist, and demanding that she be punished for it. The backlash was so bad that a not insignificant number of Chinese people ended up coming out in her defense and saying that they didn't have a problem with it. She wasn't doing yellowface, she wasn't putting on an accent, and she wasn't claiming to be Chinese. She was just engaging with the fashion of a country that wasn't her own. And since when did that become racist? For a bunch of Asian countries, China, Japan, Korea, this is a big part of their tourism. You can rent hanboks in Korea to walk around in, you can try on silk dresses in China or kimonos in Japan. Equating a country's fashion to its entire race and culture is a much, much more racist idea than acknowledging it as part of the country's rich tapestry of identity and export, because you're reducing the entirety of Chinese culture down to an aesthetic. Americans find this idea harder to pass, I feel, because a lot of their engagement with black culture is tied up in the history of black people in America, so it's much easier to point out somebody exploiting black culture and taking a hard stance against it, because we know that white people with do-rags and black scents are, at the very least, being unintentionally insensitive to the plight of black Americans, and, at the worst, deliberately using their aesthetic for their own gain. It's the same in England with carnival and Caribbean culture. I've had another thought about this, because I think also, like, a lot of the reason why we tie specifically black culture and the stealing of, like, clothing and image from black people, I think the reason why we should tie that more to cultural appropriation than, say, like, borrowing the same things off of Asian cultures is that so much of, like, black culture in the West and the things that we think of as black culture are things that they have fought for since slavery, right? It's something they have had to claw their way through to being recognized, to having that identity within themselves. And so for people, white people, to take that from them feels much more exploitative than, for example, borrowing Chinese looks, because China has a rich cultural history spanning thousands of years. And, like, yeah, Asian identity is oppressed in the West, but it's not in Asia, you know? So to me, it's like, I understand more so why you can accuse people of committing cultural appropriation based on image alone, based on just what people are wearing in terms of black culture, because so much of that image has been built from the ground up in spite of colonialization, slavery. The difference is, engaging with other cultures, trying their clothes, trying their foods, integrating yourself into them, isn't appropriation. It's implementing multiculturalism. And yes, it's a fine line, especially when, as white people, we're engaging with it from a different place than people of colour engaging with American culture or Australian culture or British culture. But the harder we draw that line, the more we other those non-white identities, because by saying we cannot engage at all, we are making it even more separate to us. We are making it more of a taboo. I wouldn't call a British person dressing in Yankees merch and becoming obsessed with baseball a racist appropriation of Americans, so why are we labeling the same people wrong for doing the exact same thing to countries that don't speak the same language as us? And speaking of language, I want to talk about the strawberries thing. One of the biggest backlashes these girls got was for their supposedly mocking insensitive version of Japanese, where they mispronounce English words like strawberries in a supposedly racist way.
I start out by saying strawberry, and then you repeat back blueberry. And when I ask who's everyone's sweet idol, you're gonna say Betty-chan. Are you ready? Strawberry, blueberry. みんなの甘いアイドルは Betty-chan. Hi, Betty desu.
This TikTok from an actual Japanese person explains my issue with it way better than I can.
The point to understand here is that idol culture is a very, very small slice of Japanese culture. It's not an embodiment of Japanese people whatsoever. Everyone in Japan knows that it's a certain act, it's a certain way of speaking and behaving and dressing. And so it would be like if someone were to watch that Netflix series on people wanting to be mermaids and thinking, oh, American culture is about becoming a mermaid. Like it's not. It's a very, very small slice. And just like how anyone from any country could pretend to be a mermaid, anyone from any country can pretend to be an idol. Like, it's not actually exclusive to Japanese culture. And so in a lot of these countries, like in Toronto, for example, there are a number of maid cafes that is idol culture. So we're supposed to think about idol culture in the same way we think about cosplayers. We don't get mad at white people for cosplaying because we all understand that they're all dressing up as a certain anime character or a game character. They're not dressing up like Japanese people. So when you get mad at someone for dressing up as an idol because you think it's offensive to Japanese people, you are making this equivalence that idol culture equals Japanese culture. And let me tell you, a lot of Japanese people will not be happy with you for that assumption.
Before I started editing, I started watching a couple of other videos on the topic made by like commentary YouTubers who know nothing about like K-pop culture versus like J-pop culture. And like a lot of the like hardline anti sort of stances came from a lot of people whose only exposure to idol culture is in K-pop, which is a completely different style of idol culture to Japan. Japan has a very particular like image and voice associated with that idol culture that K-pop just doesn't. And also J-pop has always involved foreigners in it, like white people. Like there's a particular kind of idol in J-pop that I'm going to butcher the name of, Kaigai idols or overseas idols, which affect the stylings of J-pop without themselves being Japanese. So you will find people from other countries, and like even within Korean pop, you will find this. You'll find Thai members, Chinese members, Taiwanese members of groups. But in Japan, it's possible to have white members of groups. It's possible to have other members of groups, but there isn't an equivalent in K-pop really to Kaigai idols. So a lot of the hate wall that was coming down was from people whose only exposure to idol culture is through K-pop. To be clear, I'm aware that the sorb3t girls in particular are grown adults who are making decisions with presumably some money behind them, so it is different. And again, I think so much of this comes down to intent. Like, it comes down to like whether or not she was like co-opting someone else's culture for her own in a racially insensitive way, or whether we're just taking it that way because we don't know enough about the culture. And like, I think her apology happened very quickly. I think people accused her of like pulling the Japanese boyfriend card, but like if you're immersed in Japanese culture and you do have a Japanese boyfriend, that having that person there to validate or who has encouraged you to do this thing, that does, at least to you personally, validate your belief that you're not doing something wrong, right? Like, obviously. I love Nick is not green. I love you, dude. I think you're awesome. But like, I think at one point he referred to it as like a bit fetishy, and I'm like, okay, I kind of get that, like where you're coming from in terms of like the idol stuff is quite cutesy and girly and it's very like overly Japanese in that sort of maid cafe way. And she has a Japanese boyfriend and she's learned and she speaks Japanese and she wants to release music in Japanese, and so I kind of get where you're coming from. On the other hand, if she was doing this with another culture that was less sexualized, would you be saying it was fetishizy? Because Japanese idolatry in particular is really overly fetishized by a lot of people, and I don't know if fetishize is the right word in this context. It's definitely overly involved, but we don't know if she's fetishizing it. Like, we can only interpret from what she's showing us whether or not she's fetishizing it. I find that to be like an awkwardly hardline response to that, and like it makes me uncomfortable a bit because again it sort of reduces all of that sort of idol maid cafe Japanese culture down to just that, sexual objects, and that bothers me. It's a complicated issue and I can't make a call on it because I am white. I can't make a call on this. I just know that for the most part, most of the backlash I have seen against these women for doing this has been from white people, or well-meaning white people. And a lot of the people who are saying, it's not that big of a deal, have been Japanese people. So I'm, again, and maybe I'm just, like, not seeing the whole picture. Maybe I'm not seeing all of the responses. Maybe the majority of the responses are, oh, fuck these girls, yeah, they deserve to get doxxed. Like, they should never have been engaging with this culture. Maybe that's it, but I don't know, that just scares me. If that is the wide-reaching stance, if that is what most people are thinking, that's terrifying. I just think we need to have so much more nuance in these conversations. We need to have so much more awareness that people aren't perfect and that there are pitfalls you can fall into without being a terrible person. Yeah, it's unbearably cringe in a lot of ways, but like, you don't have to look at it. You don't have to engage with it. So much of this cringe culture series has been about dissecting what makes something cringe and also why we perceive it that way, but also in discussing like the feeling of cringing, right? We look down on things that are cringe because they make us uncomfy, they make us squick, they make us ick, they make us want to push it away and ugh. And I get it, like, so much of that video makes me feel a bit awkward, but like, you don't have to engage with the cringy thing. You don't have to bully someone for doing a cringy thing. You could just not look at it. You could just do what most people do on like the streets of a major city like New York or London, see someone doing some weird shit in a tube car and just move along. Avert eye contact. Let them go about their day. People are weird. People do weird shit all the time, constantly. I'm sure if somebody came in and like Truman showed my life and like filmed me doing everything every day, I'm sure I'd do something at some point during my day that a bunch of people would be like, excuse me? I'm not putting it online for people to see, but that doesn't mean I'm not doing it. That doesn't mean that everybody doesn't have weird little habits that some people, like, the stuff you do is weird to somebody. No matter what you're doing, no matter how normal you think it is, it's weird to somebody. The difference is that these girls were putting it online for the world to see, and the world got intense about it. All I'm saying is, if you see cringe stuff, look away. You don't have to bully people about it.
Essentially, this is about a girl who's playing a certain character that is presumed to be Japanese because she has a lot of these cute Japanese mannerisms like, ha 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 ha, strawberry. And people, mostly American people, are interpreting this to be a mockery of Japanese culture. And this is actually a grave misunderstanding of two things, of A, the Japanese language, and B, of Japanese culture, in particular of idol culture. First, from a language perspective, people are confusing the Japanese accent, so a Japanese person speaking English, with something called gaidaigo. Gaidaigo means words from the outside. And so in Japanese, there are a lot of words that come from other countries, from other languages, that are then converted phonetically to Japanese, that then become embedded into everyday Japanese language. One of the easiest ways to learn Japanese is to learn the Japanese alphabet, because then you'll realize that Japanese as a sound is restricted to those 46 different characters. And so you can easily take a lot of these English words and then convert them phonetically into Japanese, and sometimes the other person can actually understand what you're saying. So there is a very subtle difference between a Japanese person who is trying to speak English versus a Japanese person who is borrowing an English word and converting it into Japanese phonetics. And I think for someone who doesn't speak Japanese, it's a very subtle difference that's very hard to pick up. But if someone says strawberry, to me, that is Japanese. I know that there's a Japanese word for strawberry, which is ichigo. But in Japanese, there are multiple ways to refer to the same thing. And so you can say strawberry, like strawberry shortcake is strawberry shortcake. But if someone says that, to me, that's not someone mocking a Japanese person trying to speak English. That's Japanese.
But jumping off of what he said, as I mentioned earlier, I learned Mandarin for 6 years of primary school, grades 2 through 7. I have retained almost none of it, except the really foundational stuff and how to count to 10, because it's a difficult language to learn, but also because as I started to get older, practicing it started to feel uncomfortable. Let me explain. Mandarin is a tone-based language. So you could see the exact same sentence written down on paper, but depending on how you pronounce the tones, you will come out with a completely different sentence. For example,
so in China, went to the supermarket, okay? He wanted to use a new word he learned. He tried to buy strawberry. 草莓, yeah. But he said 草莓, which means sister. But guess what? You're at the grocery store and you asked my sister, I still give you the strawberry.
So, when you're as Caucasian as I am, and you're practicing Chinese authentically, it starts to feel like you're doing an accidental racism, because you have to get the tones right. So you basically have to do what sounds in your head like an impression of a Chinese person. Ni hao ma means how are you? But you can't just say ni hao ma. You say ni hao ma. Please don't come for my terrible pronunciation. It's been years. I'm so sorry. And then the other person would respond with wo hen hao. Not wo hen hao, wo hen hao. Again, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And taken out of context, it sounds like you're trying to do a bad impression of a Chinese person. And when you're a teenager and you have the option to keep feeling uncomfortable publicly doing something that feels insensitive, or to take ancient history instead, you choose ancient history. Because when you're badly butchering European words, people don't look at you like you're racist, they just look at you like you're stupid. And that feels less uncomfortable. So much of how we as white people define cultural appropriation is what makes us specifically feel uncomfortable, with really no input from those other cultures as to whether or not they see it that way. Because, to be clear, it was never Chinese people who were making me feel bad for this. Chinese people are very accommodating with people who are attempting to learn their language, like every culture is. It's rare to meet a British person who hears an Asian person's first attempt to speak English and is immediately horrible to them, and if you do meet that person, run away, because that's what a real racist looks like. And that fear of looking insensitive hasn't gone away as I've gotten older. In fact, it's only gotten worse. Anybody who's been subscribed for a while or has seen some of my other videos knows that I started learning Korean about 3 years ago. Korean is a wonderful language, and I don't regret learning it for a second, but the thought of speaking it to an actual Korean person terrifies me, because I'm so scared of getting it wrong. Realistically, I won't get judged for mispronouncing a word, but I've got that imposter syndrome fear of thinking I've mastered something and then actually doing it and discovering that I'm terrible at it. Like Ollie London, for example, terrible piece of shit that he is. The amount of clips of him attempting to speak Korean to Korean people and utterly butchering the language while those people politely but awkwardly ask him to repeat himself for the third time while still not understanding what he's saying is the truest definition that I can think of cringe.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
만나서 반가워요.
반갑습니다.
이름이 뭐예요?
네?
이름이 뭐예요? 이름이 뭐예요?
The worst part of learning Korean has been learning the English integrated words. Words like coffee, chocolate, party, fork, juice, office. There's countless examples, but they're all words that have been Koreanified to flow better within the language. The same way we don't alter our pronunciation mid-sentence to accommodate the original pronunciations of words, neither do they. Because that would be weird. As one of my favorite ever TikToks points out,
this year, summer, I was in Korea, and I linked up with a homie that I haven't met in a long time. We were just catching up. Oh my god, how are you? You graduated? That's insane. Where do you work? Whatever. Okay, so there was a conversation about like food and preferences. So I just asked him. 야, 너 스테이크 먹을 때 아스파라거스 넣냐? And this bitch, he looks at me dead straight in the fucking eyes and has the audacity to just degrade, I guess, ask me, 야, 너 미국에서 온 새끼 아니냐? 아스파라거스가 뭐야? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I supposed to say asparagus? Asparagus? Do I go, yeah, no, steak. 먹을 때 asparagus 넣냐? It fucks the flow! Why are you bitching? I'm trying to help you understand what I'm trying to say! You monolingual fuck!
but learning these words separately makes you feel a tiny bit accidentally racist. Coffee, chocolate, party, poker, juice, office. It feels like you're doing a bad impression of an Asian person. But if I order a coffee from a shop in Korea and I pronounce it like a British person, they probably won't understand me, or they'll at least have a harder time. It's the coffee 하나 주세요 versus 커피 한 잔 주세요. In a similar vein, I was in New York a few weeks ago and I was trying to find a book in a bookshop. Eventually, I gave up looking and I went up to the counter to ask if they had it. "Do you have The Plotters by Kim Un-soo?" The man started typing, and then he paused, and he looked at me really sheepishly, and then he went, "Sorry, the what?" And without missing a beat, I went, "The Plotters?" And he immediately knew what I meant. Both times I've been to America, I've had situations like that happen. Americans find it easier to understand what you're saying if you pronounce things in their accent. I can't ask for water in America, I ask for a water. Not because I think Americans are stupid, but because they aren't used to hearing my accent and trip over it because they don't know how to integrate those sounds into their understanding of how that word is pronounced in a sentence. How is that different to pronouncing words like strawberry in Japanese or chocolate in Korean? It makes more sense to pronounce words in the way their language expects it to be pronounced, and it's actually the more racially insensitive thing to do otherwise. But our associations with cultural appropriation are too tied up in the image of it all. If something looks racist, then it must be. If you're trying to look like an Asian person would dress or do their makeup, then that's the same thing as co-opting their culture, which means that any act of trying to adopt another culture into our own becomes cultural appropriation. Technically, drag queen terms are cultural appropriation. A lot of them come from AAVE in America and are filtered through black circles down into queer circles and eventually out into the mainstream straight circles until the entire world is saying words like slay and serve. But people are a lot less likely to jump down your throat for adopting those words into your lexicon because there's no obvious racial connection that you can make to them unless you know enough about black and queer history and how AAVE is co-opted constantly. But to be clear, I'm not telling people to go after straight girls on TikTok using words they heard on Drag Race. And that's actually my point. How far do we let this rigid interpretation of appropriation get before it becomes completely ridiculous? Do we stop letting white people do mukbangs because that's a Korean thing? Do we ban every Chinese place that doesn't serve authentic Chinese food, even if the restaurant is entirely owned and operated by Chinese people who are just exhibiting a different version of their culture than the one displayed in China because their lived experience is different? Do we ban anybody from cosplaying anime characters or using anime sounds on TikTok because that's insensitive to Japanese culture?
Catch me if you can, Mr. Holmes.
Do we lambast white kids from predominantly black neighborhoods for speaking in certain accents that we perceive as black, even though they don't know any different? At what point does it stop being a crusade against appropriation, and does it start being an excuse to bully people? The Kardashians spending their entire careers co-opting black culture for their own gain is not the same thing as a white girl becoming obsessed with Japanese culture and trying to integrate some of it into her life. People doing blackface is not the same as people spreading AAVE terms into the mainstream, although I will never forgive the right-wing media for ruining the word woke. People are so afraid of getting it wrong that they will refuse to try, not just in participating in other countries' practices or styles or linguistics, but also within their own country and culture. I know people who won't engage with the LGBTQ community, not because they're necessarily bigoted, but because they're scared that if they don't get it right first try, they'll never be allowed to try again. I know a lot of queer people who feel the same way, who feel ousted from their own community because they used the words wrong or didn't agree with the mainstream idea of something. Trans people are being vilified by society and the language they would like to be spoken to with is being taken away from them, mocked and thrown back in their faces. But on the other side, a loud portion of the LGBTQ+ community scream from the rooftops that it's not that hard to get people's pronouns right, and how dare you screw it up even once! The shame associated with forgetting to use their or misgendering a trans person can be severe and damaging because it isn't coming from a negative place, and sometimes not even from an ignorant one. Sometimes people are just human. I'm not even sure I'd class myself as cis anymore, but even now I constantly overthink my interactions with people. I wonder if I'm being inclusive enough. I repeat my friends' pronouns over and over in my head to make sure I don't screw them up, even though I know they'll probably be gracious if I do. And that's what drives some people to not even try, to refuse to engage at all. And that's how you end up with people in the middle of the transphobes and militant queers. The ones who aren't bigoted but are just ignorant because they were scared off by the different language and strange culture that they didn't understand, and they are now being forced further towards the right-wing QAnon transphobia side because the other side is blaming them for not engaging. And sure, they should engage. They should listen to trans people, to queer people, ignore the hateful rhetoric. But the hateful rhetoric is soothing the fear of doing something wrong by asserting that no, the queers are the ones acting out of order for demanding that they be treated differently. You will forget people's pronouns sometimes. You'll misgender somebody at first sight based on an assumption you've made about their physical appearance, and you'll feel bad about it forever, even if they're nice about it and they forget it immediately. You'll feel racist practicing Mandarin as a teenager because you know how it looks to the people around you. You'll feel out of your depth when confronted with cultures you're not familiar with, and it will make you want to just pretend they don't exist, that it's not for you, so it's okay if you ignore it. Because engaging with it is uncomfy, it's embarrassing, it's cringe, and there is nothing worse than that. In order for multiculturalism as a social movement to exist, we have to be okay with feeling a little bit uncomfortable. We have to learn to live alongside the idea that practicing other cultures and stealing other cultures might sometimes look similar, but they are fundamentally different things. And it all comes down to intent. We have to let people be bad at things, mispronounce words, accidentally commit appropriation whilst trying to appreciate, because otherwise cultural pluralism will become a thing of the past. People will go back to segregating other countries' identities from their own because they're scared that engaging with them will get them in trouble, which I'm sure I don't have to point out is way more racially insensitive than just engaging with the culture on an earnest level, even if you screw up. Shutting out other cultures is always more racist than engaging with them. So no. Don't go out and get cornrows. But don't stop listening to R&B and engaging with black fashion and culture. Don't do a fake Asian accent or spend thousands of dollars on surgery to make yourself look Asian, you freak. But don't stop eating Asian food. Don't stop watching movies from other cultures. Don't stop trying new things. Be open to new experiences and don't be afraid to be embarrassed or screw it up. Because you will. You'll make yourself cringe and maybe make others cringe too, but as long as you try and you earnestly engage with other people and cultures, you'll be okay. Because that's what being a human is all about. The moment we forget that is the moment we give up on having a multicultural society. I don't know about you, but I can't think of anything worse. Something I couldn't fit into the rest of the video is also how we view Asian people doing stereotypes of their own culture, like Manila Luzon getting reamed for doing a racist Asian impression by the mostly white members of her season of Drag Race, even though to her it was simply a caricature of the real people she knew, or Nigel, who you might know better as Mr. Roger.
What's you doing? Drain the... Oh my god! You're killing me, woman! Hiya, drain the...
The rice.
She draining rice with colander. Hi.
Who frequently comes up against criticisms, usually from well-meaning white people, that he's perpetuating stereotypes, when if you actually listen to the content of the videos rather than focus on the accent, you'd know isn't true.
Yeah, sometimes I do get feedback sometimes that Uncle Roger perpetuates negative stereotypes for Asian people, and I see where they're coming from. I'm doing a character that is very close to me, and it went so big because everybody can relate to it. You know, people grew up in Asia, they know an Uncle Roger in their family. I view Uncle Roger as a celebration of Asianness and Asian culture and Asian things in general. Because, you know, Uncle Roger, if you look at the things I make, Uncle Roger never puts his own race down. If I started making videos where Uncle Roger is saying things like, oh, I'm Asian, I love eating dog, you know, then that would be a problem, right? But to the people who accuse me of that character being a racist caricature, I would urge them to actually listen to the things I'm saying and see that everything I say is lifting our people up. I think the people who also think Uncle Roger shouldn't have an accent, they're essentially saying that Uncle Roger should sound white, which is very problematic in itself. Asians have accents, and sometimes we want to do a character with an accent, and that character, like Uncle Roger without an accent, it just wouldn't be right.
People hear affected Asian accents, even done by actual Asian people, and they decide it must be racist, even if other Asian people have little to no problem with it. I don't know about you, but I can't even read the phrase emotional damage without hearing
emotional damage.
Stephen He got famous doing an Asian voice, but he also does a variety of other accents unreliant on his heritage, and also none of that is relevant to the fact that he's funny as fuck. They're all just aesthetic comedy choices that they're making. Thick Asian accents aren't inherently racist, especially when being done by actual Asian people. Thick Asian accents being done by Mickey Rooney in The Breakfast Club almost entirely ruin my love of that movie, but that's different. That's a caricature being made by white people for white people to mock Japanese people. That is not the same thing as Asian people lovingly poking fun at their own culture. It's not the same thing as teenage girls who are really into Japanese idol culture, adopting idol culture, which, as that guy on TikTok pointed out, isn't even the full spectrum of Japanese culture. It's an exacerbation of Japanese culture. Someone in his comments said that, like, idol culture in Japan is sort of like drag culture over here. Like, we wouldn't accuse somebody of adopting drag culture of adopting all of queer culture, right? Like, those things are connected, but you can't label them as something that is representative of the whole. And like I said, I think Americans have a harder time trying to pass this out than a lot of the rest of the world. Like, in Australia, we never really had that problem as much. I think maybe because we're so full of other countries' people. Australia's only got, like, 28 million people in it, which is not many people considering how big it is. And a lot of those people are immigrants. I mean, Australia as a country is made entirely of immigrants, but you know what I mean. Like I said, my area, the town that I lived in, had a lot of Sudanese people living in it. It had a lot of people from Hong Kong. And I just grew up more around those cultures. And so I'm a lot more aware of them and aware of how they fit into the world. But also those cultures where I lived were just part of life. It wasn't considered racist to, like, have, like, Chinese silk pajamas. It wasn't considered, like, an issue to, join in for Chinese New Year celebrations or engage in, like, Japanese dance. Do not get me wrong, Australia is still incredibly racist. Like, there is a massive racism problem in Australia. I want to be very clear about that. It's just that, like, alongside the racism, there is also a lot more integrated multiculturalism, which is weird to think about and is something that I've had a lot of trouble dissecting over the years. The fact that, like, I know that there are racist slurs that were getting used up to when I left high school. That's 2015. That is not long enough ago for those words to have been being thrown around in the general lexicon of Australian conversation. We also lived alongside those cultures a lot more readily, so it's a weird thing. But yeah, like, to be clear, I'm not, like, being an Australia apologist and being like, oh, Australia's reputation with racism is so much better. It's not. They did a full genocide against the Aboriginal people. Like, it's not good. I'm just saying that my personal experience living alongside other cultures was a lot more integrated in Australia than, like, the online black and white discourse would have you believe you're able to live, if that makes sense. And I think that's so much of culture, like, multiculturalism versus appropriation, comes down to intent. Are you intending to mock and steal from a culture that is not your own in order to either profit for yourself, like the Kardashians did, or to lord over it, like the caricatures in old movies are, like blackface, like yellowface, etc.? Or are you trying to engage with a piece of a culture that you find interesting? I often think about, like, how it looks to be a white girl speaking and learning and speaking Korean. I am aware that it makes me look like a Korea boo. It makes me look like a weeb to anybody who who thinks of Asian culture as so other, a white girl learning Korean to them seems weird and quirky, right? Because they would never consider that. And yet, like, most of the people I know in this country can speak French because they had to learn it in primary school. And then I bring up that, oh no, I didn't learn French in primary school. I learned Mandarin in primary school. And people are like, oh my God, wow, really? What do you mean, really? It's one of the most spoken languages in the world. Much more spoken than French. It's such a weird attitude that we have towards the line between cultures, like white versus non-white. And there's no right answer to this. And I might get hate from both sides of this argument. I might have people saying that I didn't go hard enough on either side. And like, I agree, but I don't think this is one of those problems where there is a black and white solution. I think this is on the spectrum of, I mean, everything's a spectrum, but I think this is on the spectrum of there are right ways to go about it, there are wrong ways to go about it, and sometimes those ways overlap depending on the intent you have while you're doing the thing. I engage with K-pop, right? Love K-pop. I have a video about it. But I don't engage with like K-pop stan culture because to me that's a bit much, right? That's very culturally significant to a lot of Asian countries, is that particular kind of stan culture, which we in the West see as very alien to us. It's totally normal to come up against stuff that you don't understand and feel icky, feel uncomfortable, reject it, not like it. But then you have to interrogate why you feel that way. Why are you so upset by like a 16-year-old white girl speaking in like a kawaii Japanese sounding voice using Japanese sounding words? Why does that bother you so much? Is it because you think she's intentionally being racist? Or is it because the image of those two cultures melded together feels wrong to you personally? What is the actual issue that you have? And I think once we interrogate that, I think we'll be a lot better off. Because most of the responses from actual Asian people that I saw online during this whole debacle were like shrugging at it basically and being like, yeah, and there are disgusting weeb men who have done way worse over the years and we just don't even talk about it anymore. That's just like part of the tapestry of the internet, that there are men out there who just fetishize Japanese women to hell and back. But when a 16-year-old girl earnestly engages with it because she thinks it's fun, that's not okay? I don't know, man. It really frustrated me. It's another one of the situations where, like, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, the things that we think of as cringe, actually I think it might have been the K-pop one, the things that we think of as cringe are often things that are things teenage girls love, because teenage girls are cringy. Worst thing you possibly be as a teenage girl. That's why, like, the Barbie movie gets new backlash with every single piece of, like, media that comes out about it, that people are, you know, saying that they're hashtag not my Ken because he's, you know, just following, but they've girl bossed Barbie. I'm sorry, if anybody was actually a teenage girl, you'd know that Barbie has been a girl boss the entire time. This is not news. I'm sorry to all of you men out there who didn't grow up watching the Barbie movies, but oh my God, you missed out. I think it just frustrates me because all I want is to engage in other cultures. I'm so interested in other cultures. I'm so fascinated in other cultures and other countries' like history and linguistics and like fashion. And it bums me out to think that there is a barrier there that I feel sometimes of like awkwardness where like I think about, I would love to go to Korea, right? I don't have the funds. If anybody would like to pay for me to do that so that I can make videos on it, absolutely give me all of your money, please. I'm poor. I would love to go to Korea. It's a dream of mine. I would love, 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 love to go. And one of the things that most tourists do in Korea is wear hanboks. But even to me, like, even though that's literally a part of their tourism, right? It is a part of their culture. It is a part of how they sell themselves to other countries that are coming over. I have had thoughts about like, well, is that culturally insensitive for me to dress in those outfits? No is the answer, by the way, because that is part of their tourism. Then it's not cultural appropriation to dress in an outfit they are asking you to pay to dress in. They're asking you to engage with their history, engage with their culture. It's more racist to be like, no, I don't want to, that's different and weird. Your white guilt should not overshadow the fact that other cultures are sick as fuck and that hanboks look dope. And that's something I've been struggling with for a couple of years. It's a wider, more global issue, and I think we need to talk about it more. So this video might get me completely destroyed in internet circles. But you know what? If this is a video that takes me out, I'm happy to go out on this hill because I think I'm right. I think it is always better to engage with other cultures, even if you fuck it up, even if you accidentally commit cultural appropriation, even if you like totally fumble the bag. It is always better to try and engage with those cultures than it is to shut them out entirely and draw a line under it and say that you're not allowed. Always. I don't know. This is just a thought. I could be wrong. That's part of what this essay is about, is that I have to be okay with being wrong. I have to submit myself to not having the answer, which is awful. I hate not having the answer. I hate admitting that I could be wrong about things. But to me, I think that's what the difference boils down to. It's complicated. There isn't a right answer. I'm just overthinking it a lot while I'm editing this because I know that the moment this video goes out, like, I'm subject to strangers' opinions of it, right? Like while I'm writing this, I know exactly what is in my mind and my heart and my head about what I want to say and how I want to say it and what I think is right and what I think is empathetic. But I know that the moment this goes out onto the internet, I don't get to decide like who sees it and who gets to have an opinion of it. Like people who don't know me, don't know my content, don't know my history are going to stumble on this and are just going to take it in the worst faith way possible. And I just have to be okay with that every time I post a video. But especially when I'm posting a video like this as a white person who really is not an authority on anything to do with race and should not be. I worry about it a lot because I don't ever want to do something wrong, do something racist, hold racist opinions, talk over minority voices. But I think these things are important to have conversations about, which is why I'm more okay with posting this, because I think having the conversation is important. I don't know, man. I'm torn about it. I just don't want to do anything wrong. Like, I never want to do anything wrong. Asian people who happen to be following me or who stumble on this video, like, I would love to hear all of your thoughts about it and about how, like, what makes you feel exploited versus what doesn't. Does people wearing outfits, like, you know, hanboks in Korea or kimonos in Japan or that sort of thing, does that make you feel like people are co-opting your culture? From the most part, what I've seen on the whole is that it's a no, but, like, for you personally, does it? Or, like, what does make you feel exploited? Like, more than that? Like, is there something that you feel is more offensive to you? Is there something... Do you feel infantilized when white people jump to your defense before you can get a chance to say anything about it and accuse people of doing things that you would never accuse them of? Like, which thing feels more upsetting to you? I'm only going off what I have been able to glean from, like, the wider internet, but, like, I could be wrong. Like, or even if that's true of most people, it might not be true for you. So I'm always open to hearing about how it makes you personally feel, and whether you think this video needs extra points, if you think I need to make a follow-up and clarify some stuff. I think it's important to get the voices of everybody involved in my channel, except for racists. Y'all can fuck off. Because I'm not right about everything. I hate it. I hate that I can be wrong about things. It's awful. It's cringe. It makes me embarrassed. It's the same reaction I have to seeing things that are cringy. It just makes me feel bad. I would rather be wrong and learn, like be wrong and put myself out there and then learn, than be wrong and never say anything out loud and just hold that wrong opinion for the rest of my life. This video is going to be way longer than I meant it to be. But I just keep feeling the need to, like, clarify stuff because I really don't want people to get the wrong opinion of what I'm trying to do with this conversation. I hope this makes sense. Anyway, that's been my soapbox for today. I'm sorry it's been so long since the videos. I hope that this wasn't too bad of a one to come back on this, like, really stressful topic right after I've been away for a couple months. But yeah, welcome back. Welcome to any new people who are seeing this for the first time. Welcome to any haters who are here trying to have a go at me. Feel free to leave all that hate in the comments. It really boosts that that algorithm. Hi, you might recognize me from my previous videos a few months ago. Yeah, I did sort of drop the ball on this channel for a hot minute because my chronic fatigue took over, which is part of one of the videos I want to make about, like, going through the NHS with chronic fatigue, how that has been. It hasn't been great, I won't lie to you, but that's why I've taken a few months off YouTube, although I wouldn't call it off because I wasn't doing it intentionally. It was more just I did not have the energy to write scripts or conceptualize or, like, sit down and edit stuff. Like, even, like, doing this, I had to move all my equipment out of my room because it was taking up too much space in my room. That means that if I want to film in my room, I would have to carry every single bit of equipment back upstairs to my room, set it all up, which means I'd need at least 2 scripts because if I'm going to be filming, exerting that much effort to film, it needs to be worthwhile. So then the other option is to film down here, which I don't know is a viable option. So I could film all of this footage and then hate it and realize this is a terrible location and the lighting's bad and the framing's bad, and in which case that's a load of other extra effort. It's not like I suddenly have energy now. I don't. I just reached a point after a couple months where I was like, I've wasted all this time not trying either of those options because I've been too tired, which seems like a silly excuse when you say it out loud. I was too tired. But that's what it's like. It's like a constant exhaustion all the time. I went to my GP today about it. I will be adding that step of the journey into my video. But it's just it's been really hard work trying to motivate myself to get out of bed. Motivate myself even just to write the scripts. Because my scripts take a lot of research. I'm very articulate, but if I have to go off a script because if I allow myself to just talk, I will ramble and I'll have to cut out. I've spent so much of my time cutting out ums and ahs and buts. I did just then, and likes. I have to cut out likes a lot. Even just editing my TikTok videos the last couple of weeks, I've noticed how much time I spend saying and like. They're just filler noises, but I drive myself crazy, and I can't listen to that in editing. It makes me go mental. I could do unfiltered content, but I would have to edit it a lot more, which is more work for me. So I need to do more work at the forefront, and writing's the bit that I enjoy anyway. So I need to do more work at the forefront and do more work on the writing side of it before I allow myself to sit down in front of a camera, which means that I need scripts that are usable. And in order to have usable scripts, I need to have done enough research. And that's something that I find incredibly stressful and exhausting. You know, I could just be a lazy right-wing content creator and just pull a bunch of shit out of my ass and plaster on the internet pretending that it's true. But unfortunately, I have integrity and like empathy for other human beings, which like it's a real downer. It really sucks. It makes my life a lot harder. Instead, I feel the need, I am compelled to research my videos within an inch of their life for the most part, which means that, and like I have my tangents and I say things that are incorrect and I get things wrong, but like for the most part I want my videos to be right. If there is such a thing. And there is in a lot of contexts. But I also want them to be art, which, you know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about like what my art should look like. I've been talking about this way too long. I want more freedom to talk about the things that I want to do, which is what this channel is for. This channel is for me to talk about the things that I want to talk about. And I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of things that involve a lot of research, which I love doing, but my chronic fatigue is just making that all very, very hard to do. So I'm going to try and pick the videos back up again. If this setup works, it would be really easy. It'll make the next few videos a lot easier, because then I can just leave this set up in the spare room because almost nobody uses it. Yes, I do live with my grandmother, can you tell from the decor? But if this doesn't work, then that means I have to pivot, and it means that I might take longer to get videos out, and like there's not a lot I can do about that other than do my best all of the time, which I'm doing anyway, or I like to think I'm doing anyway. I'm gonna go back to practicing my Korean while watching anime and eating Chinese food now. Annyeong!